So, as part of our ongoing series of conversations ahead of the Regional Food System Conference on the 5th and 6th of October, today I'm fortunate to be talking to Katie Palmer from Food Sense Wales. Katie, welcome, thanks for your time. So tell me about Food Sense Wales. Is it a government-funded project, and what are you responsible for?
So Food Sense Wales, we're all about aiming how to influence and impact on how food is produced and consumed in Wales. So we want to make sure that sustainable food, farming and fisheries are at the heart of a just, connected and prosperous food system. And really, we're doing that in two main ways, partly through working with programmes on the ground, delivering often as part of UK programmes. And partly through looking at influencing through policy development and advocacy. And we're a charitable fund that is hosted within the NHS in Wales, but we're funded predominantly through lots of different sources through our programmatic work, the likes of National Lottery and Esme Fairbairn Foundation, for example.
So tell us about some of the projects that you deliver across Wales then. I think you're particularly interested in making sure children and young people have access to healthy food.
Yeah, well, we're interested in the food system as a whole. So I think, you know, it's really important that in everything that we're looking at, when we look at the food system, that we look at it in its entirety. But certainly one of the really important starting points for us is the food system is making sure that everybody or every child in Wales is receiving their right to food. And one element of that, I think, is making sure that, you know, the free school meal system we have in Wales works for those children that need it, but also that the school, that food in school as a whole ensures that children are not only receiving that, you know, nutritious school meal every day, but also that they're learning about, you know, where their food comes from, how to cook, how to budget, and so that, you know, how they appreciate food in their lives as a whole and can become good food citizens themselves. So I think it's, you know, it's about the whole of the food system. And alongside that, what we're really interested in is making sure that we're integrating policy. So yes, we're talking about how we make sure that, you know, every child in Wales receives a free school lunch every day. But actually, where does that food come from, and is it produced in an environmentally sustainable way? Is it supporting our local economy in Wales, and is it supporting our rural livelihoods?
Are you able to tell us a bit about the policy context within Welsh Government? What are the kind of policy levers that could be used or that are being used to ensure healthy food and better public procurement of local and regional food?
Well, I think one of the challenges that we have in Wales is that although we have this ambition of Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, we still have aspects that are very much sit in silos. And I think, you know, we're seeing at the moment in Wales, I guess one of the key pieces of policy is legislation, is the Agriculture Bill, which is very much looking at how our, you know, primary food is farmed, and but that very much is just looking at sustainability aspects of production. And then we have a Healthy Wales obesity strategy, which is looking at kind of those public health outcomes and how we look at physical activity and diet and where the levers are there. And that's looking at everything from kind of the food environment and looking at things like, you know, fast food takeaways close to school gates. It's looking at advertising in conjunction with the UK government, and it's looking at local plans within health boards about how they can tackle overweight and obesity. And then you have a food and drink plan, which is very much about the food and drink processing sector, which again is a separate plan. But we haven't got in Wales an overall vision for what we want our food system to do for us as citizens in Wales, but also what we want it to do to support a healthy planet as well. And that's where I think, you know, we really struggle. And one of the other programs that we work on is supporting the development of the Sustainable Food Places approach in Wales. And that's very much looking at local governance and citizen engagement around food. It's very much about making food a defining feature of where you live. And it's about working in a cross-sector and a holistic way within a place. And it's great to see that we've got at least one of the places in the For the Region event that's working towards that approach at the moment.
Yes, Swansea is really interested in becoming a sustainable food place, and I know Cardiff has been a sustainable food place for a number of years and has recently got a silver award or something for that. So what does that mean on the ground in Cardiff? Tell us about what being a sustainable food place means.
Wow. So I guess it means that you have you have a top-down and bottom-up approach to what's happening in the city. So you have lots of agencies and organisations working collectively together and integrating plans across the city to help promote healthy and sustainable food. But you also have this groundswell of people, whether that's be through businesses or citizens, working towards that same goal of healthy and sustainable food. And actually Food Cardiff are about to launch their new strategy towards gold off the back of their silver award, which is only one of 4 actually across the whole of the UK that have achieved that silver accolade. So it's very much about that feeling of developing a good food movement and people feeling that they're part of that kind of food democracy movement, I guess, at a place-based level. But it's also making sure that there's a recognition and an aim to make sure that everybody in the city is getting access to good food.
Yeah, the good food movement, it strikes me there are a couple of concerns, and when you're talking about the accessibility of healthy local food, the affordability of that local food is a key factor there, isn't it? Because those of us that want to shop at local produce markets or buy from local producers, we know that often we're paying a premium for that locally produced food. It's a bit of a luxury. How can we make that more accessible to all, and what are the sorts of projects and initiatives that are making sure healthy food is more accessible to all sorts of people across Wales?
Yeah, I mean, I think that bit about the premium probably isn't quite the right way of phrasing it. We know that, you know, the value of the current food system all sits within, you know, the supermarkets where, you know, let's face it, around 95% of us are buying all of our food through supermarkets, or a good proportion of our food through supermarkets. So the most of that retail aspect of our food system comes through the food supermarkets. And what we see is very little of the value in the food chain sitting with those primary producers. So actually what you want to do is look at, and there's been some really great work coming from the sustainable food partnerships across the UK in this respect, is looking at how you can retain more of that value within your local area through doing things like working with community supported agriculture, box schemes, local alternative retail, so that you can make that food better value for the people that are working and living in that local area. To give you an example, I guess, from Cardiff, we've been developing a network of pantries across the city, which has been reliant to some degree on working with food redistribution charities to provide some of the food, but slowly growing in the background, local enterprises, social enterprises, local food businesses, which are also supplying into those pantries, so that you can work with a model of businesses that are doing some of maybe the high-end restaurant trade, but are also supplying some of their product into more affordable routes. So that kind of mixed blended model for retailers, I think is really important going forward. And there's lots of activity going on in this area, and social farms and gardens have just got funding for doing their Resilient Green Spaces programme of work. And that's got some really exciting work on in terms of developing allotments. It's going to be working with food hubs and open food network to make some of that purchasing across digital platforms much more accessible and easier and affordable. It means it creates the ability for more cooperative working, which reduces costs and that kind of thing. So there's a real mix of different things which are being tried and tested out in the field at the moment, which moves us one step away from food banks and supports with that transition really from where we are at the moment, where we've got a bit of a two-tier thing going on, to actually creating a bit more of an equitable system.
Great. And food sovereignty within communities, and I suppose sharing those skills intergenerationally. We've lost a lot of the skills about growing our own food, and great to see projects that bring those skills back and encourage young people to pick them up again.
Yeah, really definitely. And we've been doing that through the school holiday enrichment programme. Actually, there's lots of great work that's been going on in schools to bring growing projects to school. Again, social farms and gardens doing lots with orchards as well. So I think schools have got orchards going into places, and yeah, there is an awful lot of really exciting activity that is happening in the grounds in communities. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do as an organisation is try to bring some of those stories to life, and to actually tell those stories and experiences that people are having, to make that more visible. And I think one of the reasons that that's really important is because if we're trying to influence government, and one of the things I should have said earlier was that the community food strategy that Welsh Government has put into its programme for government, is a really good opportunity for us to be having a discussion about, should government be thinking about a target on how much food should be sustainably and locally produced and consumed in Wales? Is that community food strategy an opportunity for that? So I think we're really excited about having a discussion with what people think the way forward is with that opportunity.
Great. Yeah, I was struck by what you said about all these different policy silos and the need for a sort of joined up vision of what we want for our food system. And there are a couple, I found at least 2 different food manifestos for Wales, but it's one of these things where broadly we all know what we want. It's just how to get there and how to actually make that happen. I was struck by what you said in terms of what we can do in communities. But also, if you look at transport, there's been such a lot of work, hasn't there, about active travel, and in public organisations, there's this thing called the Healthy Travel Charter, which organisations can sign up to, and that's sort of run through Public Health Wales. But you can imagine similar vehicles to that being used for the food system, looking at procurement. But it's all about kind of joined up working, isn't it, across silos and involving everyone.
It is, and I think that's absolutely happening at a local level. I think that COVID has facilitated that happening, and I think no more than in the kind of that obviously that food space has been really crucial. So I think that kind of cross-sector collaboration and even within government working much more closely between health boards and councils, for example, I think we've really seen that place-based working has really taken off over the last 18 months, 2 years. But I think that can only get us so far. And I think that, to really make tangible steps, there needs to be a recognition of how these policies integrate at a national level. So, local authorities don't really have the power or the funding, let's say, to ensure that every child in their school can access a free school meal. So it does need that national vision and direction, and I apologise for my dog. It really does need that national vision and direction, but it also needs that local level vision and action, and that local action and vision needs to not just come from policymakers, but it also needs to come from the ground up as well.
Yes, really interesting. you know, we've talked quite a lot this week about the difference between seeing ourselves as consumers and the power we have as consumers to sort of demand different from supermarkets. But you've used the term food citizenship, and there's a growing movement for us all to see ourselves as citizens with sort of a shared sense of responsibility and an important role to play. But I appreciate what you've said. It's not all ground up, it's top down as well. Before we wrap up, can we talk a little bit about health? So I note that Food Sense Wales kind of sits within the NHS. Obviously the food we eat and the food that's available, particularly in more deprived areas, has a massive impact on our health. I wonder if some of the talking points are around, you know, what food, firstly, what food is served in hospitals. I mean, I seem to think hospital food might be not the most brilliant example of healthy food, which is ironic. I wonder if that's changing. And also, you know, do we connect enough diet with health? You know, a lot of illnesses and diseases, do they map back to our diets? And does food offer a way to solve a lot of the health crises that people are experiencing?
Well, yes is the answer to that. Yes is the answer to that question. I mean, I think that the big macro picture is that, you know, we've got over a quarter of our children starting school overweight or obese, so an unhealthy weight. And if you're living in a deprived part of the country, then you're much more likely to be overweight or obese. So that kind of piece around, you know, poverty and obesity is linked. We know that everybody, nearly everybody, but especially children and teenagers, aren't eating anywhere near enough vegetables. And, you know, vegetables are really important for protection against, you know, certain cancers and coronary heart disease and all the rest of it. We know that 60% of our adult population is overweight or obese, and in, you know, over half of the people in Wales not being a healthy weight kind of seems like a slightly crazy situation. And, you know, we also know that diabetes, or certainly pre-COVID diabetes, and big chunk of that being type 2 diabetes, which is caused by can be caused by poor diet, is a huge part of the NHS spend. And I was looking at figures just last night, actually, from an England perspective, that was showing that there's, over the last 4 years, there's been an 18% increase in amputations as a result of diabetes. So, you know, absolutely what we're eating is having an impact on our health. And, you know, and COVID demonstrated that as well. You know, in countries that had the highest obesity rates, they also had the highest mortality rates too. And we know that, you know, being obese did bring about poor outcomes from COVID infections. So we absolutely know that what we're eating and our public health are inextricably linked. What I would say is not happening is that the actions to amend that are just not there. You know, when you think about how much, just from a purely economic perspective, how much money you would save if you invested much more in prevention. But we also know that the whole piece around diet and what you eat is really complex. It's not straightforward. There are all sorts of reasons why people eat the foods that they eat. And it's not as simple as just giving people information about eating your 5 a day, which was the rationale really behind the Peas Please work that we work on with partners across the UK, which is you have to look at the whole of the system. You have to look at, you know, how food is being produced and what the kind of government policies are around what types of food are being produced, and how easy it is, for example, to produce fruit and veg, which, you know, in Wales we're only producing 1/4 of a portion of veg a day per head of population. You need to look at how that veg is going into the out-of-home sector, how it's going into the retail sector, what promotions and offers are going on veg, what messaging kids are getting through advertising, you know, through social media and through television and through billboards. You need to look at how easy it is to eat it. So you've got to look at that. You've got to look at the whole piece. And when, you know, less than 2% of our advertising spend on fruit, on food and drink is going on fruit and veg advertising, it's not surprising that we are where we're at with it. On hospitals per se, I think it's always interesting to look at hospital food. You can't just look at it through one lens. So you have different aspects to hospital food. You have patient food, which obviously has to be all sorts of different menus depending on people's illnesses and the reason they're in there and dietary requirements and everything else. And then you have non-patient food, which is the food that the staff will eat and the food that the visitors and tractors and whoever comes out to the hospital site will come to eat. And they're two quite different things. And then also you've got your retail environment as well in hospitals, you know, so who's on your concourse when you come in? Is it McDonald's? Is it Starbucks? Who is it? So there's lots of different aspects to looking at the hospital food. And I think quite often you just hear about what people are eating when they've been in hospital poorly, and not necessarily hearing about the other aspects of it as well. And I think you can also talk about, you know, school food and where our school food standards are at. And that's something else through the obesity strategy that's going to be reviewed. It's supposed to be reviewed before the pandemic. So, you know, and that very much at the moment, you know, in primary schools, that's only got one portion of veg on the menus, and we want it to see it having two veg like it does in the secondary schools. But also, is there an opportunity to align what we're producing in Wales with what would be a more of a kind of potentially climate friendly diet with, with what the school food menu and what the kids would like to be seeing on their plates, rather than being wholly prescriptives around, you know, specific nutrients that should be kind of appearing. So I think there's an opportunity to have a conversation about how we match what we're producing in Wales and what we could be producing in Wales with what our children are eating, and the bit in between that is also then education, using the new curriculum and educating kids around, you know, where their food comes from and opportunities to work in the food system in the future.
It sounds as though there's a huge amount of work being done and a huge amount of work to do. And I think the schools question is really important for so many different reasons, not just because we're creating the food citizens of the future and impacting their health as they grow up. But yeah, it's a whole culture shift, isn't it, into communities and families about what food we eat and what food we like to eat. As we look forward to the 5th and 6th of October and a regional conference, have you got anything to say about what our conference could talk about, what you would like to see happening in a whole system conversation? What do you think is sort of our highest hope for a whole system conversation? Any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, two things that strike me about the areas that you're talking to. One is that, you know, you've got very high child poverty rates in that area, and we know the coastal parts of the region are, you know, coastal communities have got very high child poverty rates. So I think that a focus on that is really key. On the flip side, on the positive side, so I'll end with a positive note, you've also got one of the best regions for growing food and for horticulture, and you've got the seas as well. So, you know, it's a fantastic area to be looking at this kind of foundational economy approach that the Welsh Government is really keen on, and how to build local food systems that are going to, you know, really support those local communities and livelihoods that sit within the region.
Thank you, Katie, for all your insight and for taking the time to come and talk to me. I stand corrected on a few points and much better informed coming out of this conversation than I was going into it. So I really appreciate your time to talk.
No problem.
To me.
Thank you for inviting me.
And hopefully we'll see you on the 5th and 6th of October as well to be part of this really important conversation for our region and for Wales as a whole. Thank you so much. Bye for now.